in a lot of fields like image generation and writing and video, like there is, at least for now, a je ne sais quoi about, human creation. You can tell, even as these models have gotten really, really impressive and really, really hard to distinguish, people seem to have a preference in these creative fields for books that are written by people with experiences, and people prefer music that is composed by people with emotion. So it's definitely an interesting time to be a creator.
Welcome back to Beyond the Blox. This week we're going deep on AI to help creators understand how the different types of AI tools work and the community concerns with how they might shape the future of Roblox. But first, we're your hosts. I'm Adam.
And I'm Fedor. So I've been spending a lot of time on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it recently. And as I, like to stay in the loop on what Roblox developers and creators are thinking, I'll periodically open up various Roblox related feeds and just kind of take a scroll. And something that I've been seeing a lot of is discussion over AI. And it's not really surprising because it seems like everybody from David Baszucki to Roblox Corporate to the player base itself is constantly talking about these implementations and how they're going to change everything. And it seems like people's opinions boil down into two polar extremes, as in a lot of things in life. Either, AI is this godsend that's going to revolutionize how technology works and it'll cure cancer and save everybody and give everybody a million Robux, or it's this evil thing that's taking away your jobs and going to subject us to a miserable Terminator-esque dystopian future. And, as somebody who likes to keep a nuanced view of technology, but also somebody who is afraid of some of the more dangerous implications of this technology, I thought it'd be really interesting to try to take a look at sort of the past of artificial intelligence very briefly, the current state of AI technology on the platform, and then also have a bit of a level-headed discussion about where realistically, beyond the exaggerated numbers and the stock market hype, really where is it going specifically on the Roblox platform. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. I've prepared a bit of a presentation here that should guide us through the past, the present, and potentially the future of AI on Roblox. So without further ado, is AI taking over Roblox? I think the first thing we really need to talk about is how we got here, right? For a lot of time back, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when you heard AI in a video game development context, you weren't thinking about ChatGPT or LLMs. What you were thinking about was basically a general term for any kind of like enemy pathfinding, anything that sort of any computer algorithm that would act as if it were another player, sort of an NPC. And while a lot of these algorithms were, relatively complicated, A star and whatnot, they were completely different from what is considered AI today, which with recent developments in technology, or rather at this point, not super recent developments, but things that I mentioned like neural networks, which you see here, transformers, LLMs, all of that stuff. Essentially, the modern definition of artificial intelligence is systems that have the ability to learn. I'd like to preface this by stating that I am a computer science undergraduate and I'm currently taking an Introduction to Machine Learning course, and that I am not anywhere near qualified to talk about the technical implementations of all of this stuff. The neural networks that I was just showing off, the transformers. I have a vague understanding of all of that technology and the math behind it, but this presentation is going to be largely focused on the actual user and creator facing implications of these technologies. Not, is it realistically possible for this massive transformer model with 24 gazillion parameters to do something on the platform? So without further ado, the state of AI on Roblox right now. The first bit of AI technology that I think we can talk about most perhaps infamously and recently is safety and moderation. Roblox faces a very unique challenge. There are tens, if not, hundreds of millions of interactions going on simultaneously on Roblox at any time. That's a chat message being sent between a friend and another friend. That's somebody talking to a completely random person in voice chat. Maybe they're talking through a translation feature to somebody across the globe. Maybe somebody else is drawing something in a free creation game. There's just an insane volume of data to be processed on the Roblox platform. And as Roblox continues growing, having real human moderators filter through all of that just doesn't seem very possible. And this sort of challenge, the challenge of taking some sort of massive amounts of data and processing it, is exactly what artificial intelligence has been pretty good at historically. Unfortunately, there's been a bit of a mixed bag of results. On the left, you see the age verification technology, which we've talked about quite a bit. Ultimately, this is an implementation of artificial intelligence and one that has been very, very controversial, as I'm sure everybody is aware. If you can use AI to estimate the age of players, then surely you can make it safer. Clearly, that's not really working out at the moment, but I would like to point out that there have been some less prevalent examples of artificial intelligence improving moderation in the Roblox platform. For example, what you see in the top right here is hashtags, the filter. That's something that I've personally seen improve quite a bit. I remember maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I tried to talk to people and it felt like every other message I was sending was just turning into a slurry of hashtags because the Roblox moderation chat filter was very, very much heavy handed and was pretty primitive to my understanding. So if it saw anything that could potentially in some world be interpreted as, dangerous or unsafe in any capacity, it just struck out the whole message. Another thing is asset moderation. That has also, in my experience, been improved pretty heavily by artificial intelligence tech. I don't know about you, Adam, but I think I've seen a lot less instances of my assets just getting randomly deleted, as was the case quite recently.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems to have been improved for sure, sort of the nuance. And I think that's where you mentioned how AI is quite a broad term, right? We're using it more and more now to refer to specifically some of the more modern tools, but AI is just such a broad thing. And so a lot of these, the chat, the moderation, probably started off with either the two ends of the spectrum, right? The really, really simple algorithm of just a block list of words that are not allowed, and if it sees them, that's it. And the other extreme is it's entirely on a human, and we're relying
Yeah.
purely on actual intelligence to look at messages and decide. And AI is kind of the really broad grey bit in between, where it's not just these straightforward algorithms, it's not just human intelligence, but somewhere in between. And we've slowly been maybe moving left to right across that like grey bridge, I guess, between the two with the improvements over the time.
Yeah, and actually, that transitions pretty well into the last image on the slide. Have you heard of Roblox Sentinel by any chance?
I have heard of Robot Sentinel. I believe it's some sort of open source model that they
Yeah,
produced. Is that right?
exactly. So I actually hadn't heard about this until I began researching for this episode, and I just typed in like Roblox AI safety, expecting to see the standard litany of critique against the facial scanning and the chat filter improvements. And was really, really surprised by this open source model that Roblox recently published, along with a blog post talking about how they've implemented this AI powered model that essentially takes in massive sums of chat data from user interactions and is able to pretty accurately flag them for things like instances of child grooming and other things that you do not want to see on the Roblox platform. I've really not seen this talked about that much in, sort of the Twitter sphere or whatever. But on that blog post, they've said that Sentinel is currently running in production at scale, and that in the first half of 2025, this is a little bit of an older blog post, its proactive capabilities have helped our team submit approximately 1,200 reports to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So, what you see here in the image is sort of the pipeline that they have going to review this chat stuff. And talking about bridging that gap, it starts out with candidate generation, where a bunch of different algorithms, a bunch of inputs, including, the standard reports that users submit through the settings UI, keyword filters that we've talked about, sort of the old historic backbone of Roblox moderation, and various other generators are augmented by Sentinel, which is this flagging algorithm that they've developed that then goes into an automatic investigation phase where basically all of those inputs are collected and all of the inputs are classified into, dangerous or unsafe behavior or, regular acceptable behavior through an LLM and various other automated moderation technologies. And then finally, it goes down to that human review center where the specific cases are, analyzed by an actual person who can make the right call about, hey, is this unsafe behavior that needs to be reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, for instance? And I think this is really reflective of what AI moderation should look like. I think there's been sort of an emphasis on solutions that are just kind of magic. And I mean, listen, I love magical solutions. I've talked about this on the podcast before when Roblox is able to just flip a flag and then things get better for everybody. But at the moment, to me at least, it seems that we're a little bit further away from AI being able to just make the right call all of the time. So using it as part of a flagging workflow that is ultimately reviewed by a human seems to be really, really sensible, even if it's not as, exciting as AI takes over all of moderation forever.
I remember there's a quote of someone, and I think it was from like the 80s, right when computing really started taking off and the internet came about. And it was that a computer is purely for helping you crunch the numbers and kind of present you information, but a computer shouldn't be left to make a management decision because it is not a human, it's not actual intelligence. It might look like it, and to them back in the 80s, it seemed like magic. To us today, some of these LLMs seem like magic. But you shouldn't trust it to make that management decision. It's for crunching those numbers, showing you the patterns on, a vast scale that humans can't quite comprehend. It can take those millions, billions of messages, show you the patterns, but then it's down to you, humans, to make a decision. And so I think that's a really, really nice demonstration of that, where you're using it as a flagging system, but it's not making the ultimate call.
Another thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is based in AI is sort of the subgroup of technology that improves the ability for users' communication and, other sorts of utilities like that. When you think of AI, you think of these big things that we'll talk about later, like generative AI, or the things we've just talked about, like the safety filter AI that's going to block you from talking with your friends. But something that, like I said, is a little bit underappreciated is some of the other technologies they've added, like real-time translation and speech-to-text APIs. Basically, the sort of issue of massive amounts of data that can't be processed in real time by humans is exactly applicable to, say, translation. You can't have a manual human scan every single message written by an English player and then transcribe it into, say, Korean or Japanese. However, with an artificial intelligence model, you can do that pretty reliably in real time, which I think allows people to connect with each other in ways that haven't really been possible. I think another element of AI that is also a bit underappreciated on the platform at the moment is the algorithm. For a while, when you thought of AI, a big thing that at least I think of is algorithms on other platforms like TikTok, where it feels like, they're looking at me through a camera lens the entire time because I'll look at something in real life or talk about something and then boom, suddenly it's on my TikTok For You page. Or the YouTube algorithm, which seems to, with uncanny predictability, point out videos from completely new creators that I, enjoy. And I think that's something that Roblox has kind of lagged behind for a while, but something that they've really worked on in the past recent years. Where, I remember a lot of this podcast I'm realizing is a lot of I remember when this was that. So I'm definitely
Yeah.
starting to get old, it seems. But I remember when the Roblox algorithm was literally just like, hey, what are the top games by CCU? Here are the top games, go play them, which would kind of result in this unbalanced situation where Jailbreak had 100 billion, oh, not 100 billion, but 100,000 concurrent players, and then everything else on the platform was stuck at a couple thousand players because of this sort of snowball effect where people weren't really seeing what they wanted to see. They were just kind of seeing what everybody else was playing. Whereas I think, I don't know about you, but I've noticed the recommended for you algorithm get much better to where there's now sort of these niches of unique communities built around these games that have, 10,000, 20,000 concurrent players that I've never heard of because it's not really my niche.
It is scarily good. It does make it hard, and you kind of have to now turn to some of these external tools to see what are just the top 10 games by CCU if you were curious and interested. But yeah, it is very, very good. But this is exactly where AI fits in, right? Sort of those are the platforms you mentioned, millions of different small little factors that are going into that decision, and it really does feel personalized, and that's just not something you can get by just writing a 1,000 line algorithm by hand. Like it just can't happen. So yeah, I've seen a fundamental shift in what gets recommended to me on the homepage over the past few years.
I do think that one interesting component of this is that I don't know if you've seen The Social Network, but there's a scene where a young Mark Zuckerberg like writes out the prototypical Facebook recommendation algorithm on like a window with a marker. And I think something interesting about AI algorithms that do recommendation is that in a lot of cases they're black boxes that there's millions, billions, trillions of parameters that aren't set by a person on a window writing the algorithm because he's a genius. They're just sort of defined by a machine to maximize various KPIs that the people training the model give. So it's not very clear how it makes these decisions. You just kind of give it a massive data set of here's what this player played for 30 minutes, and here's what they played for 60 minutes. And then also, here's how much they spent in this game and how much they spent in this game. And then the machine sort of makes the decisions and creates the patterns in the, neural network that determine what games it recommends to that kind of player. And an interesting consequence is that because nobody really knows how it's making these decisions, it's going to be very interesting to see how the metrics that the people training the model choose to give it impact the results people get. And sort of who makes the decision about which, I mean, obviously somebody at Roblox, but how Roblox makes those decisions about which metrics to make.
There's pros and cons with shifting towards these kind of recommendation AI based algorithms, which I think some of the pros are you get exactly what you want to play. You get really personalized recommendations. Another bonus is that it's harder to game the system because a lot of those weights and factors are maybe hidden, or as you say, it's a black box. You can't even reverse engineer it. You don't really understand why this person is going to be served this game, but it works and that person does want to play it. It potentially makes it harder to game, and it's possibly fairer. It just depends how you sort of see it. But are there any negatives with sort of switching towards these kind of algorithms that you can think of?
I mean, I think there is something to be said that I've noticed about a lot of other social media platforms, or rather like content, TikTok really is the big one. when these algorithms were a lot more simplistic, and maybe based on view counts, I think it was a lot easier for there to be like a sense of shared cultural moments, sort of, where everybody saw like Jailbreak hit 100,000, and everybody back in like 2018, 2017, when these algorithms were more skewed towards just showing the biggest videos, everybody saw when a creator would publish a series and it'd go viral and everybody would see it, and it was this sort of sense of a shared cultural moment. Whereas I think in a lot of ways there's many instances where like my TikTok for you feed is completely different than anything any of my friends are seeing, so there's not really that sense of shared connection. And I can still send videos to my friends, and then that probably adjusts their algorithm. So I'd imagine similar things are going to be possible, and are likely going to happen as the algorithm becomes more and more customized, because this is something that Roblox is actively working on.
Very interesting, because this is exactly, I think, the reason why YouTube Rewind, for example, got cancelled, and they didn't do that anymore. And you might find more and more with the Roblox Innovation Awards and things like that. Games are coming up there that you're like, I've never heard of that.
Yeah,
I've never
yeah.
seen that. And somehow it is like one of the most popular games on the platform. And it's exactly as you said, before everyone would have seen a certain few, and therefore it's really easy to know who to include in a YouTube Rewind. It's really easy to know who to include in an award. I think now, because you can be locked in that niche, and these niches can be very big, it can be tens of millions of people playing a game, and yet somehow it doesn't receive an award because there's these whole other games in a whole different world that you're not part of, because it's not part of your recommendation algorithm and sort of what you're interested in. Some people can get upset that their area isn't represented. And so that's a potential negative with this, is that there isn't a sense of, this is the one view of what Roblox is and what Roblox has to present. It's much harder to do that when there's this kind of recommendation.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, that's not entirely a bad thing. We've talked a lot about how the algorithm being super customized has, like you said, created, instead of one massive sort of community around one game, a bunch of these 10 million. I mean, I'm saying 10 million, tens of millions of people as if it's nothing, but these, like massive communities around games that are completely tailored to their own audiences. But I guess, yeah, there is sort of that concern of, I've personally, for example, if you look at the screenshot that I've taken here, they're my recommended for you. I've been playing a lot of driving games, and I've been playing a lot of first-person shooters, because that's the kind of games I've been working on recently. And my recommended for you is almost entirely driving games and first-person shooters, which is, probably great for me if I only want to play more driving games and first-person shooters. But there's something to be said about like, hey, what if I want to go play Dress to Impress, or a Dress to Impress like game? Maybe that's something that I want to see as a player, but I don't even know. I mean, obviously I know that Dress to Impress exists, but maybe I don't know about it. And maybe it makes more sense for the algorithm to, I don't know, skew towards new stuff. And ultimately, I think that kind of point is really interesting, because you can give the algorithm different parameters to train on, even if we don't know exactly how it's working. I'd imagine it'd be possible to implement a set of parameters that somehow measure how new a game to a user is, or how unique it is compared to existing projects. And in fact, I'm sure that if a Roblox engineer is watching this, they probably have something like this already implemented, and it's just not as noticeable in my specific case. But overall, they've talked a lot about changing how the discovery algorithm works and improving it in the future. So I'm hopeful to see sort of a balanced move against maybe just reinforcing specific sort of echo chambers of what you've already seen. The last bit of AI that I kind of alluded to in terms of what is available on the Roblox platform today, and the bit that is the most controversial, is none other than generative AI. But before we can dive into arguably the spiciest component of artificial intelligence technology on the Roblox platform, we have a quick message from our sponsor, Geek.
If you're interested in exploring partnerships with huge brands like Walmart, L'Oreal, Coach, and NASCAR, but have no idea how to approach finding a brand to work with, then you're in exactly the same boat as so many developers on the Roblox platform.
You're a creator, not an expert at brand outreach, but that's where Geek comes in. There's so many brands out there with a marketing budget ready to spend who use Geek's data platform and expertise to match with experiences that align with their goals.
And best of all, it's completely free. You just sit back while Geek show brands why your audience is valuable and connect you with the ones that are interested.
Geek are looking for Roblox developers to sign up in the integration network today. It's completely free, so sign up by clicking the link in the description down below to start gaining visibility from brands. Moving back into generative technologies, let's talk about sort of the first thing that I remember seeing of generative AI and LLMs as it was added into Roblox. Code Assistant. I think this is something that has, taken over the AI craze outside of Roblox in a lot of ways. My dad, for example, is a software engineer, and he talks about how he's got like 5 LLMs running at any point in time that, are helping write documentation for him or like making his code easier or running tests for him. And quite frankly, as a developer on Roblox, I've really not seen those kinds of benefits. I've tried out Code Assistant and I've used external tools like GitHub Copilot and Visual Studio Code. And while it's been solid at generating generic code snippets for when I need to write something, that's like, hey, go over all of these parts and duplicate them and reparent them, or go serialize this object, or maybe write this generic algorithm that's been written down a bunch of times. I think the fact that Roblox is a relatively niche platform in comparison to the millions of lines of written, or sorry, millions, probably trillions of lines of JavaScript or C++ or Python, I think Roblox is still relatively smaller in those sample sizes, and a lot of models aren't trained with Roblox in mind. So I've personally seen Code Assistant kind of lag behind in comparison to what I'm able to do in other IDEs and other programming languages.
Yeah, definitely. I also use a lot of this in my day job. I'm a software engineer, I'm a data engineer. As you say, continuing patterns, it's fantastic at spitting out similar lines of code that other people have written, very, very good at. And it can do that with Lua, and it's getting better and better. I tend to use external tools rather than Code Assistant, but it is good at suggesting the next thing to do. But I think where it's missing, and what you can do with JavaScript, C++, a lot of those, you can write unit tests quite easily for those. It tends to just be that you've got an input and it's creating an output, and therefore the AI can kind of, if it is writing some code or changing some code, can run those tests and sort of check whether or not the answer is what it expected. And if it isn't, take on that feedback of what the test said failed, do some more changes, and then try again. I feel like that's quite hard to translate across to a 3D world where I write some code to do something that's really specific. When I hit this part and there's another player over there, this thing happens, this weird interaction goes on, some physics happens, it's running at 60 frames a second, whatever. It's quite hard to write unit tests for that, and quite hard to get an LLM to somehow know whether what it's written produces the user experience that I'm after. And I know that that's also a challenge in front-end development, for example, where it's very visual, and again, you don't necessarily have a test to say this thing looks nice or this thing feels nice.
Yeah. Certainly, I think that's kind of the big blocker between the sort of vision of being able to type out a description of a system and it just outputs the system working perfectly. Because like you said, in a lot of these other, scenarios where the output is a lot easier to digest by an AI, you really can't have like the no code approach where with those sorts of outputs, you can literally just have it like look at the output, recognize, okay, this is bad, and then do the problem again, and then do it again, and then do it again, and do it again. And like as the model gets better, eventually it'll need less and less time to just go back and forth. But with Roblox AI autocomplete and the way that Roblox projects are structured, at the moment, it can't really just feed itself like that. This is good, this is bad. You have to have the person directing it doing that. And that's impossible if the person trying to direct it doesn't know how code works. I think this is definitely a solvable problem. It's definitely a complicated one because, at some level it requires interacting with 3D systems and like an engine. But I think it's something that could be resolved, and I think something that's going to be definitely very interesting to see, as I've seen these sorts of AI tools revolutionize things like web development, I think outside of the platform. As various companies like Shopify integrate with these tools, it's becoming increasingly more possible to literally type in a prompt, and then not only does it generate the front end, it handles all of the like technical components of publishing and deploying to a server and connecting to a backend, really making that sort of prompt to entire functioning business basically possible. So these sorts of integration problems have been solved outside of Roblox, and I think it'd be really interesting to see how they work once that is resolved in Roblox. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit more in the future of AI on the platform. Moving on in sort of order of announcement is material and image generation, something that Roblox, I think at this point, announced a year-ish ago or something like that. Overall, my kind of hot take on this is that it's basically an attempt to sort of ride off the hype that was created by a lot of those early image generation models like Midjourney and all of the Chat GPT and Banana Banana Pro stuff that's come out. Ultimately, while my understanding is that the Roblox specific models were trained on datasets that were a little bit more relevant to the Roblox platform, I didn't see anything particularly special. It was cool that, you could do this all from inside of Studio as opposed to having to generate it outside and like ChatGPT and then save it and then import it into a surface appearance. I really didn't see comparable quality to what I'd get by going to Substance Painter and creating something myself or paying somebody to do something for me. Obviously, I suppose that's not something that's accessible to a lot of people. A lot of people don't know how to design their own materials, and they don't have, the budget that I have with the, a sort of studio to work with. So I have seen some developers use this. I don't know. Have you seen much use of the material image generation stuff?
I've not seen much use of it. I don't know how much from playing other games, whether you can tell whether someone else has used it, but I haven't heard too much about it. I've played with it myself a little bit, as I don't know very much about materials, and it was kind of useful just to understand what the different parts of PBR actually refer to and kind of see what it produced. But then ultimately, as you say, going to actual human artists to produce the final thing, or more procedural generation using sort of node-based approaches in things like Blender, depending on exactly what we're after. But I do think this is quite an interesting one. I guess we are in a particular demographic of creator who are maybe more professional and been around for a while. I'm curious to know whether or not more junior developers who've like just discovered Roblox, Roblox try to keep the barrier to entry quite low to get people interested who have never coded in their life, never modeled in their life, never done any texturing, to get them into Roblox, get them into game development and exploring those different aspects. So this might be a quite a nice tool for them, but I am not too much in those circles to necessarily know whether that's the case.
Yeah, I can certainly imagine even sort of the comparison that I was making with generating the materials in an outside AI model like ChatGPT or Nana Banana, and then exporting those files and then saving them and then making a new surface appearance and making sure that I get the color map into the color map And like, what is this weird purple normal map thing? What is that for? Where do I put that? I can imagine if I put myself in the perspective of, like 12-year-old Fedor, that probably would have been quite overwhelming. And while I think when I was starting out, did do my best to push through and like go and read the documentation and whatnot, it certainly would have been interesting to see what would have happened if I had these tools when I was that much younger, and maybe able to generate these results and sort of understand what I was looking at, like you said. And then, would that sort of be my like, okay, I know how to make materials, that's all I'll use for now? Or would that be more like, okay, I know how to generate materials, but I don't really have that much control over what the AI is giving me. But now that I understand how this works, maybe I can go in and invest the resources into figuring out how to make my own, or like draw them in Photoshop or whatever and then import them. So definitely, it doesn't seem like this technology is quite yet at a commercial level. However, another thing that I think we've seen a lot more of is image generation, kind of tangentially to this, because ultimately textures are just images that are wrapped around a thing. I think I've seen a lot more AI generated icons on the platform over the past like year and a half. But what's been interesting is that I think there was like a period where they were really, really popular, where it felt like a lot of new front page, or not front page, but like sort of that 2 to 5,000 player range category of games was using clearly AI generated icons and thumbnails. And then to me, it felt like it sort of receded, and I'm not quite sure if that was just the models getting better, so now they were indistinguishable, or perhaps more optimistically, is that people were getting really tired of these oversaturated and, clearly AI hallucinated icons, and people went back to just hiring developers.
I suspect probably a little bit of both, to be honest.
Certainly, yeah. I think before we move on to sort of the last and most recent announcement of generative AI technology on the platform, which is Cube AI, another side note that I'd like to touch on is what I'd like to call sort of the automating the less glamorous parts of the creative process impacts of artificial intelligence. In game development, like I've talked about, there's a lot of steps that are very painful and kind of unneeded. So whether that's figuring out like, what is a color map? What is a normal map? Where does that plug in the surface appearance? Why can't I just drag this all in and it figures it out for me? Or, UV unwrapping, which if, you've ever tried to texture 3D models, you know how painful that is. Or rigging, where you manually place bones inside the mesh that you've spent hours creating to make it animatable. There's a lot of things that are pretty solvable by AI algorithms at this point that would speed up the creative process massively. And I have heard Roblox talk a lot about trying to implement a lot of these things. Outside of Roblox, there has been a lot of AI UV unwrapping tools and smart rigging stuff that has been set up. So I think this is kind of a section of AI that really goes unnoticed, because it seems that a lot of engineers who are designing these systems are very excited about like the shiniest thing. We're going to make an AI that replaces artists. We're going to make an AI that replaces writers. We're going to make an AI that replaces video editors. But there's also another element to all of this generative stuff that augments artists and video editors and writers and makes them a lot more powerful, which I think is really, really exciting and a more natural evolution of a lot of the technologies we've seen, where the tools are just becoming that much more accessible and you get to focus more on, the creative and the enjoyable bits, and not the placing seams along the edges of a model so you can actually paint it or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm a big fan of like why are we pushing so hard for all these tools if not to let them do the boring bits that we don't want to do, and leave the fun stuff for us to carry on doing. So yeah, that sounds like a pretty good use of AI.
All right. And finally, we can talk about Cube AI, which is the thing that Roblox announced on stage at RDC just a couple of months ago. And we actually covered on a relatively recent episode. Like we talked about on that episode, basically the vision is that you type in a prompt and it analyzes your prompt, it generates mesh geometry, and then it connects it to existing code that defines behavior for that mesh geometry. So if it's a car, there's four wheels that spin and the car drives along. So in theory, a user is able to create, their own customized car or their own customized sword or really whatever they wish to create. Like we talked about on that previous episode, there's a lot of big question marks about how this is going to work in games. How does that look for games where cosmetics are the main way of monetizing? How does this really work in ways where the model generates something that doesn't line up with the theme of the game? And ultimately, I think at the moment, this technology is very, very early on in the sense that it's relatively limited. And while the visual quality has improved greatly, I don't really see myself using it at the moment, especially considering that the behavior has to be, hand defined. I think the overall vision behind this is pretty interesting and something that we're going to talk about on the next slide in the sort of future of AI technology, where it seems like Roblox is really pushing to get rid of all of these, like technical boundaries between who can have a concept for a game and who can actually execute on it. And while, personally, as a creator who already has a lot of these skills necessary, I prefer the stuff that we've talked about, like the automation of the boring bits. I can see a genuine use case for somebody like my younger brother who has no real programming experience or 3D modeling experience. I think he would, enjoy a world where he could just literally type in a car that drives and looks like this and works, and then it actually just functions. Sort of this vision of, just creating games from prompts is certainly interesting and compelling.
It is interesting. I think there's two ways that it can go, right? In terms of someone who doesn't necessarily know all of those skills and wants to use this to kind of fill those gaps. It's, do they fill those gaps with these tools and slowly learn those different skills? If you're new to game development, learning programming, learning modeling, learning texturing, learning, I don't know, making audio, making whatever, all of those things can be quite a lot. And it would be cool to fill all those gaps whilst you don't have any money and you don't have a team around you, and you slowly pick up all of those different skills and start taking over what the model was doing. The other option is, and maybe the more side that people are concerned with, is you just defer to the model to do it and you never learn anything. And then all of the people with these skills start, disappearing. We forget how to model, we forget how to program because we're relying on models for everything. And so there's two sides to it, and maybe it is down to the individual and down to us to decide how we use these models. I don't think there's a right or wrong way, but I think that's just going to be really, really interesting to see as the availability of these tools just rolls out to more and more young people who are getting into game development for the first time.
Yeah, I suppose, at least for now, it's really going to be constrained by just the quality of these models. In the past couple of months, actually, the lovely folks at RobloxDev have reached out to us and let us take sort of a behind the scenes look at some of this cube technology. And I'm going to be honest, when I opened up the view of some of the things that cube model has generated, I was thoroughly impressed by the fact that, these weren't really curated prompts. These were just prompts that people were typing in. And it was, doing a pretty good job because, sure, the things we see on screen look pretty impressive, but we see them from one angle for a very specific set of prompts, not really a representative thing of actual behavior. When we got to see sort of people just typing in what they wanted to create, it did a pretty good job even in the past couple of months that we've seen it improving. There was still a lot of snags, like somebody would ask it to generate. I remember seeing somebody asking it to generate a bridge, and it would only generate pedestrian bridges for some reason, not like bridges that cars could go over. And obviously, the behavior snag and sort of the code complete limitations are definitely holding that vision back at the moment because it doesn't know how to generate behavior for stuff. It can really only generate like tiny bits of auto-completed code. But like ultimately, these are all, I think, problems that we will see, at least if it continues scaling at the speed that AI technology has scaled in the fields of text and image and video. I'd imagine that, I'm sure a couple of months from now, it might be able to generate, actual behavior from scratch. And a lot of those issues with the 3D modeling stuff is going to be resolved. So I think what is arguably the most interesting part of episode and sort of the crystal ball section of the episode is what happens next. David Baszucki and Roblox as a company have talked a lot recently about this idea of real-time dreaming, where basically, you don't need to know how to code, you don't need to know how to 3D model, you don't need to know how to do just about anything but, dream. Basically, you talk to an assistant or you type into a text prompt exactly what you want your game to do. On a whole universe scale, not even just like one asset, but like literally simulator game where you go to the gym and then you go record episodes of the Beyond the Blocks podcast. And as you go to the gym more people watch your awesome podcast. And like I could go and play that strange game that I've just come up with just now. And, there's a lot of technological limitations between that vision and where we are right now. Some of the ones we've talked about, like, the code complete stuff not being there, the 3D models not quite being there. Will it understand that a simulator game where you go to the gym and then record episodes of the Beyond the Blocks podcast means that, like, okay, you need a gym section where you can go up to like a rowing machine and then your character does an animation and then it gains strength. Like, that's a lot of context for these models to understand and for it to all work cohesively. I'd imagine there's going to be a lot of breakthroughs that have to happen. But at this point, over the past couple of months, I've gone from like, oh, there's no way that'll happen. That's ridiculous. The game is like super complicated to, you know what? It's I think very possible in a very interesting future. Can you think of what a Roblox where everybody is a creator would look like?
I mean, that is what Roblox used to be back in the day, right? It was a
Mm.
sort of what will you build? Everyone was creating their own experiences to share with their friends, and that seems to have sort of disappeared over time as there's been more and more players, and kind of it's got more and more professional. The engine API has got more and more complicated, and you're now seeing kind of a few creators creating games that are played by lots and lots of players. It would be quite interesting to see that flipped on its head and back to the original vision of just anyone can create whatever they're thinking about and share it with others. It's hard to kind of imagine how that will work, and whether, does that just destroy the business of Roblox? Does that destroy what Roblox is at the moment for everyone? And whether or not that's a good thing or not. But the sort of the real time dreaming aspect was really, really interesting in the demos that have been shared so far. The idea of just describing, the player gets onto a boat and like suddenly a boat is there and the player gets onto it. And as you say, there's kind of wider context rather than just asset by asset, bit by bit. So it's definitely an interesting direction. I made a short about the real time dreaming and sort of asked, is it a dream or is it a bit more of a nightmare? What do people think of this? I'm on the fence so far. I'll have to see where
Yeah.
it goes and how it could be used.
I guess there's really, I think the other thing with real-time dreaming is that it feels quite a bit like a sandbox. Like it doesn't, I think when you think about game design, as both of us do a decent amount, I'd imagine, I think a game most of the time is really at its most fun when there are constraints about what you can do when you're not a god, when you're playing a, like a first person shooter, like I mentioned, you don't have unlimited health and you can't make a boat appear in front of you. And you can't do all of these things. So to me, the real-time dreaming scenario where you're just describing stuff in, like you said, real time feels a little bit more like a novelty, or maybe like sort of a broader tech vision where it's like, hey, this is the underlying, ironically, dream that we're pushing for. And then in reality, these technologies that are necessary to create this stuff will just be used in other ways. I guess the biggest thing that I can think of is somebody, generating a complete game from scratch using a prompt, where
Yeah.
there's sort of the game designer and the visual, like, level layout designer, and at a broad level, the systems engineer, but really the AI is actually executing on all of these things and then making it happen for them, which I think is going to be really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think it would. It's hard to see how it could work in a multiplayer world if it was real time in the gameplay. So I think you're probably right that creators, maybe this is just a creator tool at the end of the day, that you can walk around, ask it to create things. You got some feedback from your game, they don't like something. Okay, you go into studio, walk over to where that thing is, ask the AI to sort of produce something slightly different, and it takes into the context the entire world. It shifts things around to accommodate. Maybe you're asking for behaviors and it fills those in for you, but then you can save that world, and that is the game that other people can then go in and all experience the same thing, but it's the thing that you sort of created by just talking to this dreaming API.
Yeah, and then I guess another thing is, right, there's been a lot of discussion about the sort of will it take our jobs angle. And I think even beyond the Roblox sphere, this is sort of the question literally everybody is asking. Everybody, as a computer science undergraduate student, it seems like, yeah, there's constantly questions about, like, will we have jobs in 4 years? And that's a very interesting question for sort of all of, kind of humanity to answer. But I think specifically in a Roblox context, assuming that it does get good enough, say 3D modeling and the code generation, they figure it out and it does get good enough to where you can describe like a driving system where users collect coins by drifting around the map, and then the coins are saved to a data store, and it can just implement that like that, and you have a car model and you have the code for it. It'd be really interesting to see, does that completely replace, code writing by hand and 3D modeling by hand? Or does it simply change the way in which we do things? Because I think sort of the paradoxical thing about trying to predict new change is that that crystal ball is just a PNG that I pulled off Google. It's not a real crystal ball that I can look into. And if you look back through history, there's been a lot of instances of technology that, seem to have just like completely replaced human machinery. Like, I think an example I was thinking of in my head is like, there used to be carpenters who would just get paid to make, like a chair. Like, they would literally just take pieces of wood and put it together and make a pretty simple chair that people would pay a large amount of money for. And then obviously that got replaced by, say, like the chair I'm sitting in right now was most likely put together by, an automated factory, or not automated, but it certainly wasn't carved out of wood by hand. But like, there's still a market for people who design chairs. There are people who are still designing chairs in CAD or whatever software they use. Just sort of the things they emphasize on aren't really the task of getting the shape out of the wood anymore. It's more so like, how do we conduct a study to figure out which kind of spine design works the best for when somebody's sitting in an office chair for like 12 hours, and to prevent them from having, like back pain or whatever. Or how do we pick out the coolest chrome finish on this or whatever. Like, I think it's very easy to jump to, okay, this thing can generate 3D models. I used to spend a lot of my time hand creating 3D models as like a 3D artist. So this technology will just fundamentally replace me. But I think ultimately, if we go look at other fields where AI has already been kind of capable of quote unquote replacing people, we can see like text and books, for example. I don't know about you, but most of the books, or sorry, all of the books on my bookshelf are still made by people from their own unique perspectives and written by hand on, not by hand, probably on a MacBook or whatever, but they're still written by people, despite the fact that I could have gone to ChatGPT and said, like, generate a fun travel book for Fedor Holland who likes reading about these specific countries. I don't maybe I'm old fashioned, but like my understanding is that, the market for books is still largely driven by people. But then there are also, I've seen, I'm sure as you have, like the AI generated singers and bands that have sort of taken all over specific genres of like Spotify. So it's very difficult to see and try to predict what is going to be replaced or what is going to be augmented and what is going to be completely unused.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a similar but maybe even more related example to what we do than the carpenter is computers. And the name computer meant a person who could calculate things. And there were rooms full of computers, people who had developed algorithms for themselves to follow and shortcuts to get to the answer so that they could compute things. And they developed the computer, the electronic computer, that then did that for them. And those people, some of them were probably out of jobs, some of them probably found other things to do. But what we did is we wrote more complicated algorithms. We came up with more complicated calculations, and those people were then writing those for the computer to do. And the computer didn't generate purpose, it just helped people achieve what they wanted to do quicker so that they could spend their time either doing more complicated versions of that or spending their time somewhere else. So I think what scares people a lot about AI, the broad term, is that it's so general. It seems to be attacking every space at the same time, rather than just sort of replacing one thing and allowing us time to adapt. It seems quick and it seems general and it seems to be covering everything. And I think that's what scares people the most. But there's a full spectrum of possibilities of what it could be. We could be in Elon Musk's future where we never have to work again and we're all infinitely rich somehow, or probably a more realistic thing, which is that we shift our focus to things that interest us more and use our time on other things. And I don't doubt our ability to come up with stuff to spend our time doing.
Yeah, certainly. And I guess kind of like going back to the slide that I had about UV unwrapping and all of the boring bits of, the creative process. Like I think we can look back on, those people who were computers who were doing crunching numbers by hand, and we can kind of say retroactively that like I don't think anybody got a sense of purpose or fulfillment creatively or mentally from sitting in a room and doing, like arithmetic or algebra or whatever by hand. But I guess the question is really going to be who defines what bits are boring and, which bits are valuable. And I guess ultimately, with this driving force of technology, it seems like the push is sort of to take anything that has any bit of friction and, whether that's learning how to create a 3D model from the geometry by hand or how to texture it by hand. It seems like there's an effort to sort of get rid of that and replace it. And that is, I think, a little bit beyond the scope of this podcast on a philosophical level of what is deserving of human time and attention and whatnot. But you can certainly say that I think there might be, at least as we've seen in a lot of fields like image generation and writing and video, like there is, at least for now, a sort of a je ne sais quoi about, human creation. You can tell even as these models have gotten really, really impressive and really, really hard to distinguish, people seem to have a preference in these creative fields for books that are written by people with experiences, even if ChatGPT can write beautifully crafted sentences. And people prefer music that is composed by people with emotion, as opposed to just a robot, and I guess except a few niche scenarios. So it's definitely an interesting time to be a creator. sort of on a philosophical note, that's all we've got for you this week. Be sure to like, share, and let us know your thoughts on, AI. Will it replace us? Will we all be infinitely rich living in a utopia or a dystopia? Let us know in the comments down below.
Beyond the Blocks is produced by Seb Jensen for Last Level Studios. Watch on YouTube or Spotify, listen wherever you get your podcasts, and catch highlights every week on TikTok and Shorts. Visit lastlevel.co.uk/podcast for more.
Bye.